FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome, and you are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, and today is July 26, 2018. Hey, as always, join the fun. You know, the best part of my day in the morning when I kick back with my latte, read your emails, get some laughs, makes me think, makes me contemplate. And hey, if you've got some guests that you think we should have on the show, people who would be great to interview, who'd be interesting and shed new light on subjects either that we've talked about in the past or that we should have talked about, then please send an email to kl@kerrylutz.com, and we'll do our best to get those guests on. Well, you know, getting stuff done in life, accomplishing your goals, I mean, it's an age-old universal challenge that all of you face, and myself as well. There are ways to do things, and then there are ways not to do things. And the person you're about to hear from has written 9 books about getting things done, about accomplishing your goals, about thriving in difficult times. And his name is John Vespasian. John, your latest book, Sequentiality, The Amazing Power of Finding the Right Sequence of Steps. Welcome to the Financial Survival Network.
Hi, Gary. Thanks for having me on.
So, is there really a right series of steps, or can you figure out what the steps are before you take them? So many of you out there, you do something, it works out right, so that was obviously the right series of steps that you took. But when it goes wrong, did it go wrong because you took the wrong steps at the wrong time, or did you just have a bad idea? How do you know?
Well, when it fails, you know pretty quickly. The whole point of the book, Sequentiality, is that when you're facing adversity, you're facing critical decisions, there are patterns that people have been following in history to become very successful, to overcome adversity. And those patterns can help you very, very often to find the right sequence of steps. Let me just give you an example. One of the patterns I have identified in this book, the book consists of an analysis of about 30 biographies of very successful people or very unsuccessful. And one of the patterns that emerges systematically from people who become financially successful, and I would say also very happy, is that they have the habit of building assets. Not only financial assets, could be social networks, could be skills of any sort, could be building their health, which is also important, but they build. And this attitude is not easy to understand when you think long term, because when you have an easy choice to say, okay, should I buy A or should I buy B, or should I invest money or should I spend it, it might be pretty obvious, the answer. But when you're thinking in terms of a lifetime, and you're thinking for 10, 20, 30 years, if you are in your 30s, you could easily live another 60 years. And the idea of finding the right sequence of steps when you're dealing with decades ahead is not easy. And this is why I underline in the book many stories about how people, in terms of confusion, in terms of doubts, they have found the answer by trying to build assets in the long term. Very often, people have been building assets that are not financially productive in the short term. For instance, if you are learning another language, can take you 4 or 5 years until you can actually speak a second language. It's a long-term investment, but it will be an asset that can really dramatically improve your career. And the whole idea of the book is to show these patterns extracted from history that show how people can make decisions, sometimes in times of total confusion.
Mm-hmm. So how do you start figuring out the right steps? What's the first step to figure out all the other steps?
Well, the first step is to discard excessive emotions. One of the things that is keeping people stuck and really producing plenty of depression, anxiety in these times is that millions of people are hypersensitive. And when you're confused, when you're facing adversity, the last thing you need is to be hypersensitive. And today, unfortunately, when you read the newspapers, you see people making a fuss about little things that, someone said this or someone said that. How can people say this is not fair? And you get this mental loop of excessive reactions. People they spend hours and hours and hours ruminating about some stupid comment. That maybe the comment was stupid in the first place, but wasting your time thinking about it is even more stupid. So the idea that you have to become effective and you have to discard hypersensitivity is absolutely not self-evident. Let me just give you an example from the book. Look, one of the biographies I present in the book is the biography, the story of Dante Gabriel Rossetti. He was a great painter in England in the 19th century. In my opinion, he was a genius. He invented a new style. He invented a new movement in art. He was also a poet. But the problem with Rossetti is that he was hypersensitive. He got some bad reviews. He was attacked by some journalists. And instead of pushing forward and trying to build his career, because he was really, really good, this guy, he was hypersensitive. He became depressed. He became anxious. He didn't want to go out. He stayed at home the whole day. And eventually he became an alcoholic. He died in his early 50s, which was a complete waste because the guy was a genius. And this is something that in these times you see in many different variations, that people become depressed, they get a nervous breakdown, they get addicted to medication, they become an alcoholic. And this is just because there's too much hypersensitivity in our society. If you want to find the right sequence of steps, the first thing you have to get rid of is hypersensitivity.
So, hypersensitivity, would you define that, please, John?
Yeah, it's an excessive, completely exaggerated emotional reaction to something that happened to you, or to something that should have not happened to you, or something that you heard, or something that you watch on TV, and then you just keep it turning in your head hours and hours and hours. You cannot sleep, you cannot concentrate on your job, and what I'm saying might look exaggerated, but it's actually something that happens to millions of people to the extent that they become dysfunctional. If you want to find the right sequence of steps, the first thing you have to do is to become balanced, to become calm, to acquire serenity, because otherwise you will make mistake after mistake.
So hypersensitivity is major enemy of getting things done properly. So you get how do you get rid of hypersensitivity though? You're either hypersensitive or you're not. You have to grow a thick skin. Is that how it's done there, John?
It is easier said than done. The best method I found in history to get rid of unproductive emotions, especially depression, anxiety. There are people who worry about the future to an extent that they cannot operate. The best method I have found is to try to reduce your emotions to numbers, to statistics. Just me give you an example. Look, when someone loses his job, he becomes very upset because, I should have not lost this job. It's such a good job. How am I going to find another job? You can become extremely emotional to the extent of panicking, becoming very passive and depressed, and even dependent on, addicted to some substances. This is very bad. How do you get rid out of this? How do you get out of this loop? The best solution is to really find out the numbers. And if you're looking for a job and you're very depressed and you're very worried, find the real numbers. Figure out by making some research how many interviews you need to do to get a job, how many applications do you have to send out in order to get interviews. It's a pure question of getting the knowledge, because people become depressed and they become hypersensitive because they are very unrealistic. If you watch TV for hours a day, you get your ideas and your philosophy from watching these TV series that are extremely compelling and extremely exciting, but they are very unrealistic. You will lose touch of reality. You will lose sight of reality. You need to get to the real numbers, to the real statistics, to know what you have to do, to know how much effort you have to put if you want to invest. You have to realize it's going to take effort, it's going to take time to acquire knowledge, but it's worth it. But you have to become realistic. Unless you get to know the real numbers and the real effort you have to put into the matter, you will become hypersensitive, you will become discouraged, and eventually you will give up. And this is the last thing you want to do.
So you need to pretty much put things in perspective, look at your worst case scenario, and then what? What comes next?
What comes next is to try to avoid mistakes you can avoid. And in the book, I spend a chapter on that because the problem is that human beings, the way we are built, we are very impatient. If you start a business, you want to immediately, you want to build a huge number of customers, and you want to start making your products. And we are very much excited when you're starting a new project to such an extent that very few people, relatively few people, manage to spend the time doing some basic research. And in the chapter I devote to this matter in the book, I use as an example the exploration of Antarctica in the early 20th century. And this is a very good example for people who are undertaking any kind of project, who are looking at building their finances, who want to build their career, because in the early 20th century, we're talking now roughly 100 years ago, it was very challenging to go to Antarctica. It's even challenging still today. And the stories of people who went there are very interesting, because you see that there were several expeditions going to Antarctica. One was funded by England, another one was Scottish, and then there was a Norwegian. And you see the Norwegian people, the Norwegian guy, Amundsen, he went there and he actually arrived at his goal at the South Pole without a scratch. I mean, he went there, he planned everything, he just did it, and he came back like a walk in the park. While the English and the Scottish, they basically died, and they died horrible deaths. They were frozen, they starved. I mean, it was really horrible. And this is what happens when people are trying to understand how to start a new project, to start a business, to build their finances. We tend, as human beings, to repeat the same mistakes over and over again, because we don't bother to check what other people have been doing. And the secret of the person who actually went to Antarctica, organized the expedition, and came back very successfully without a scratch, he simply spent a few months looking at what people have been doing in similar situations. So it wasn't by coincidence that he purchased the right type of clothing, and he was wearing furs, while the poor English, they were wearing British wool, and they got frozen as soon as they get wet, while the Norwegians, they were wearing fur coats, and they didn't freeze. The Norwegians, they were the only ones who got sufficient number of dogs, because they managed to count how many dogs you need for such an expedition by simply asking for advice to people living in Siberia, because in Siberia they have been using dogs for transportation for centuries. So the lesson from the story is that when you're trying to find the right sequence of steps, you need to spend some time doing research, figuring out what people have been doing in similar situations to reach your goal. And it's not so difficult to do that when you have access to the internet, but it requires some patience. And when you're embarking yourself in a highly risky enterprise, whether it's financially risky, whether it's personally risky, whether it's career-wise very risky, you have to figure out the basics. And do not believe that it's self-evident, because nothing is self-evident. You have to spend sufficient time doing some research. Otherwise, you might end up like the people who were traveling to Antarctica, and they ended up in disaster.
Yeah. So preparation, learning from others' mistakes. I bet people afterwards learned from the Norwegians and were well prepared, right?
Yeah, and this is something that is absolutely counterintuitive.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So what else do we do? What's the next step?
Well, another pattern you find in history, people who are facing adversity, is that you have to try to find the sweet spot between what you can do and what people are willing to pay for. So this is the sweet spot between your talents or between your skills or your interest and the market. This is something that is also absolutely counterintuitive in many cases. In the book, I present the example of Giotto, who was a great painter in the early 14th century. And Giotto was a genius. He innovated in terms of colors, in terms of designs, in terms of composition. The problem with Giotto is that he was ahead of his market. And this is something that happens to people very often. They come with an idea. Maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that. I want to develop this new software. I want to develop this new app. I want to start this new type of restaurant. But Giotto made a mistake because he developed his new painting. It was, historically speaking, was very innovative. When you see his paintings today, he obviously was at least 50 years ahead of his time. The problem is that in the 14th century, there was no market for that. He found one customer who was ready to pay for that, but 99% of the market didn't like it. They wanted boring pictures. They wanted traditional pictures. They wanted dark colors, because this is what people actually liked in the late Middle Ages. And eventually Giotto was wise enough to realize that if he wanted to be successful, he had to take a step back and to focus on the market, because he could not make a living by being super innovative. And this is something that is very difficult for human beings to accept, that sometimes you might have great ideas, you must be super innovative, super motivated, super positive, but if the market is not there, you're going to be wasting your time.
Right. Yeah, well, but then again, sometimes the market's there before the market does, like Steve Jobs. I mean, he basically told the market what it wanted, and it agreed with him. It
can happen that you are a little bit ahead of the market, and then people will catch up buy your product. But you have to be very careful, especially if you are in a narrow market, because Giotto was in a relatively narrow market, because, there were people, customers giving commissions for large paintings, but there were not that many. Most of them knew each other because Giotto was living in Florence, and later he moved to Padua for a while. But it's a really small town, and I think he took the right decision by giving people what they wanted. He tried to innovate, but eventually he built a career for many decades, basically by finding this balance between his genius and what the market wanted to buy.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So I know that you're going to want to find out more. Check out the book. John, I assume the book is available on Amazon. Where do we find you?
Super easy to find. If you just type my name, John Vespasian, on Google, you will find the books very easily. You will find my blog, has hundreds of free articles. You'll find my free newsletter. Just type John Vespasian on Google, and you will find everything in 1 second.
All right. Hey, and as always, just send us an email, any questions or comments. The Twitter feed's at Kerry Lutz, and the Facebook page, Financial Survival Network. John, thanks so much for coming on, and we'll enjoy.
Thanks, Kerry.
Yeah, we'll enjoy reading your book. Take care.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.